Good afternoon, everyone. So as Mary said, my name is Michael Jordan, and I sit on the board of directors of the Archives. I was asked to speak about food today. Bonjour tout le monde. Au nom des Archives, je vous remercie d'être venu participer à cet événement aujourd'hui. Cet après-midi, je vais vous parler un peu de Madame Sue Heller. Sue was born a few years ago in Plymouth, Devon, where her father was working as a doctor. Before the age of 2, her family moved to Woodbridge on the Suffolk coast, about 100 miles northeast of London. Sue's father got a position there as a general practitioner. It's okay. We'll pick that up after. Okay. I'll go on. Woodbridge is an ancient market town. In England, market towns are commercial centers for surrounding villages and hamlets where farmers and merchants would sell their wares on market day. Market towns received royal charters granting them the right to hold markets. This distinguished them from villages and cities. Interestingly, Woodbridge appears in the Domesday Book, which was a great survey ordered by William the Conqueror in 1086 after the Norman conquest. The king was eager to ascertain his holdings and levy taxes on his newly acquired kingdom. In the late 18th century, Woodbridge had 35 households. Sue spent her earliest years just outside of the center of Woodbridge on a property called Little Grange. The house dates from the 1600s and has a mid-1800s addition. Sue's family had a small gentleman's farming operation, including a horse, a Shetland pony, goats, chickens, and ducks. Little Grange had a profound effect on Sue and framed her love for historic buildings, animal husbandry, and farming. Her most favorite place at Little Grange was the barns. We can see her here on the left with her older sister D.A., younger brother John, and the baby Jane. They are wearing matching blue wool coats that were made by a local tailor. When Sue was about 10, I think that's the right age, her family moved to the town center into another heritage property a few steps from the market square in Woodbridge. It was called Seckford Lodge. Seckford Lodge was built in the early 1700s and includes a coach house with groom's quarters above it. Sue's father, being somewhat of a socialist, preferred to call it simply 7 Seckford Street. Seckford was named after Thomas of Seckford, an official in the court of Queen Elizabeth I. Sue's father later wrote a book about him called A Tudor Worthy. It's available on Amazon if you're interested. Woodbridge looks like a lovely, peaceful place. Unfortunately, this was interrupted with the outbreak of World War II. The east coast of Britain was particularly vulnerable to bombings, and Sue's mother and the children sought refuge in Cornwall, near where Sue's father was stationed. He served as a doctor during the war. However, they returned to Woodbridge when Plymouth was pummeled with incendiary bombs. Sue told me stories of her memories of the air raid sirens, the sounds of the falling bombs, and how the fire even cooked the apples on the trees. That's the family there, the family on the left. While the war was still on, Sue was sent to boarding school at Cheltenham Ladies' College near the Cotswolds. She later attended art school at Ipswich, not far from Woodbridge, and the Bromley School of Art in London. In addition to classical art forms like painting and drawing, at Bromley, Sue learned dress design and pattern making, which would later become her career. A new world had dawned. Britain and Europe were rebuilding, but Sue had other horizons in mind. She lived and worked in London before she and a good friend named CJ decided to come to Canada. In 1956, they boarded a BOAC flight bound for Montreal. After settling in the city and finding work in the rag trade, Sue was on a ski trip to the Laurentians, where she would meet Kurt Hugo Heller, or Hugh as he was known. Hugh was born in Czechoslovakia to a Jewish family, and during World War II, his parents decided to put him on a train to stay with a family member in England. He and some 10,000 other Jewish children were sent to live with foster families in the UK during the war. This operation was called the Kindertransport. Many of these children were sole survivors. This was the case for Hugh, and he remained in Britain after the war. She joked that Hugh thought she had money, and she thought he did, while neither of them had anything. It seems though they were rich in other things. On the left is a wedding photo of Sue and Hugh. Sue designed and made her own wedding dress. It's pale blue, and Hugh's carnation was dyed to match. Sue learned that the practice of wearing white was only 100 or so years old and decided to go against the grain and wear a colored dress. They were married in Sue's hometown church in England. They had intended to have a Canadian wedding, but Sue's parents wrote many letters suggesting that home would make a better venue. My guess is they hoped they would stay. But they were happy in the New World and would have 3 children there and many, many dogs. Here we see Sue, Hugh, Richard, Andrew, and Jane in front of the mouse house on Roxon Farm. Here are some more shots of the family. On the right is Sue and the 2 Janes, and Sue herself. And in the center, all of Sue's 8 grandchildren, Andrew, Richard, Jane, and Hugh.
And the dog.
And the dog, whose name I don't know. In 1967 Expo year, Sue and Hugh were on the hunt for a farm property. As she put it, she had to have a farm. They visited many properties within driving distance of Montreal. When they came to Roxon Farm, Sue went straight to the barn, while Hugh and the real estate agent were in the house. It was here that she knew that Roxon Farm was the one. The sale was finalized for the hefty sum of $27,000. And Sue went back to work in order for them to afford it. Roxon Farm was the Acaster family homestead and was settled in the early 1800s. The log house was most likely erected in 1830. The Acasters came from North Yorkshire, as did many other Roxon families, and that's a picture of the Acasters here. There's another picture like this of Sue's family in front of the same rock. I don't have that one. Sorry. The Hellers were living in Rosemere at the time, and when the children reached teach-up age, they decided to move to the city. In 1981, they bought a lovely row house on Burton Street in Westmount. It was the year after the referendum, and a good time to buy a house in Montreal. Incidentally, it's for sale right now. I think the price went up. The farm was originally a weekend place. Despite this, the Hellers worked hard at transforming it. Sue told me that the kitchen was covered entirely in battleship green formica and linoleum, something that she was far too eager to remove. While Hugh was away at work or otherwise away, she would tear off a piece and peek underneath and cover it with a hat or picture before he got home. She was dedicated to the restoration of the farm. For example, she wrote to Quebec City and sought advice on a replacement porch railing. You can see here that she recreated a traditional motif of fir trees and apples. And on the right is a family taking a rest after the work was done. Around 1990, the Hellers moved permanently to the farm, and Sue noted in her diary, "Down forever." Restoring the farm was a labor of love. Every room was transformed and returned to its former glory. Even new moldings were handmade by Mr. Bone, using hand tools. In this photo here, we see the sewing room that was built on top of the cistern using old 6/6 windows collected on the roadside in Montreal. The family also renewed a dilapidated sugar shack and made syrup every year. The Hellers took great pride in employing locals to do work on the farm. Here we see John Hodges, David Smith, he's here, and Darcy White lending a hand. Behind John on the top left, you can see the new battens added to the barn. Sue read in This Old House magazine that tin covering on historic barns should be removed as it promoted insect damage and mold. And that's exactly what she did. Having a worker didn't prevent Sue from climbing a ladder or picking up a shovel. The farm was her passion, and she was not one to shy away from getting dirty. On the right, we see Hugh working the manure pile. In the early 90s, Sue and Beryl organized a one-day craft show that would evolve into the wool gathering. Here we can see Beryl's house, the red house, and Marcel and Lise Carriere's house, the bluish-gray house, which both date to the early 1800s. This is my favorite corner of the world. 25 years on, the wool gathering has a huge following, with more than 50 vendors of all types selling their goods. People from the local community, Montreal, and as far as New York and Vermont attend every year. For me, the wool gathering defines the community of Roxham. Roxham was a hamlet of its own, with 2 churches, a post office, a school, and its own hall. Today, these buildings are all gone or transformed, but the wool gathering is a nod to the memory of this place. I'm very happy that going forward, Evelyn Bouchard and Jeff Turner will host the wool gathering on their property, just a kilometer away on Fisher Street. Oh, I'm on the wrong slide. Sorry, I overclicked. Anyway. Now we go back. I decided to choose a few themes that Sue really embodies to my mind. A conservationist. Sue worked hard with Heritage Hemmingford to save the Hallerton Schoolhouse, which was recently repointed, and the trim was repainted, as were the original 6/6 windows. 6/6 windows are very important to Sue, and they better have real muntins and not be made of plastic.
Yes.
She also was instrumental in preserving the old convent by rallying the community. Sometimes, though, despite our best efforts, heritage was lost, as was the case for the Frontier Inn. Sue toiled for over a year to have the inn recognized as a heritage property, but it was destroyed by fire. Preservation is in Sue's blood. You may have seen her collection of old tools. Her father, Dr. Briscoe, saved the Tide Mill in Woodbridge, which was a working flour mill in Sue's youth. Today, it is a museum. Sue's mother, Mrs. Daly Briscoe, was also an example to her. In the 1960s, when many of the smaller railway lines in the UK and other places, including Canada, were being shut down, Mrs. Daly Briscoe got wind of the closure of the East Suffolk Railway, which connected Woodbridge to London, and she sprang to action. Mrs. Daly Briscoe arranged to meet the Lord Mayor of London. As she was a Londoner herself, this rail link was vital to her. She succeeded, and the line is still operational today. There is a plaque on a bench at the station engraved in her honor, and that's me in Woodbridge. An animal lover. Sue advocates for the humane treatment of animals and practices what she preaches on her own farm, where the livestock are free to roam the land as they wish. There is nothing quite like being at Roxham Farm when the sheep come down from the fields to the barn at dusk. An artist. Sue is probably most well known in the community for her artwork. Sue's mother and grandmother were also artists. Sue's watercolors have been at many shows and also appear in the publication called Images of Hemmingford, copies of which happen to be for sale here. An engaged citizen. Over the years, Hemmingfordites have come together for a variety of community events such as Old Homes Week and the Apple Festival. At the beginning,